Thank you, Steve, for giving me this opportunity to present, and thanks everyone for coming. Uh, I'm going to talk about React Native. My name is Rahul Jiresal, and I work at AeroFS. We are kind of like Dropbox behind the firewall. Uh, that's what we do. I was hired at AeroFS about 6 months ago, and I was hired as a iOS engineer. But at that time, we started working on a new project, and it was a project decision to get it out to market quickly, and that's why the decision was made to use React Native. So why do people use React Native, right? Like that's the question many of us will have. Uh, most of us think that React Native is something that you write once and run everywhere. So one piece of code and then you run it on Android, iOS, maybe web. But uh, when Facebook built it, that's not what they built it for. They had a lot of people with web expertise, and they wanted to reuse their expertise in native development. So it was meant to be learn once and write anywhere. But at ReactCon this year, someone from Facebook said it's a horizontal platform. I have no idea what that means, but I'll take their word for it. So the next question you might have, isn't this NSMeetup? Like, why are we talking about something that is like JavaScript? It doesn't even fit here. The reason I'm talking about this is that I was I was an iOS developer, but I was very amazed by the speed and agility that you can build stuff with React Native. And I wanted to share that with everyone. So all I'm doing is sharing the ups and downs in my life when I started using React Native. So this is what the title should be. So let's go and talk about the first upside, rapid prototyping. As I mentioned, React Native, like it's fast. You can get from zero to an app in like a few days, and you can. It's really good for when you're present, like showing your app to investors, or maybe even a proof of concept, or when you're giving it to a few first initial users. It's amazing for that. Uh, and to explain, like, to demonstrate that, we're going to write, like, I'm just going to show you a tiny demo app. All I'm going to do is use Instagram's API to fetch photos from my own feed uh, and call it Demogram. What we're going to need for this is Node.js. Node.js is a JavaScript platform, and npm is Node.js's package manager. So we're going to need to install Node.js and React Native command line interface. For people who who are new to the JavaScript land, npm, the Node package manager, is analogous to what we have in iOS land, CocoaPods in iOS land. And the package.json file is analogous to pod file in iOS land. So with that, let's get to writing some code. Okay, so I've made this into a video. I was not sure if I'm going to get a clip-on mic, so I didn't want to hold a mic and type with one hand and do the juggling. So I made this video. When I was making this, at some point I forgot some things, and then I fixed it in what do they call it? Fixed it in post. Yeah, that's what I had to do. So if you feel like it's jumping around, or if you feel like you're missing something, just let me know. We'll go back and I'll tell you. I'll explain. Okay, so let's start with this. All I'm going to do is create a new folder and do React Native in it. What this did is it created a package.json file and downloaded all the dependencies. On top of that, I'm going to install some more dependencies that I need in this project. You don't really have to worry about what these dependencies are for now. Like, this is not what I'm trying to demonstrate here, but I have to install it anyway. So if you open the folder the project folder, you will see that there is package.json file, which is your dependency file. Uh, there are two files, index.android.js and index.ios.js. Those are entry points to your respective apps for Android and iOS. And there are two folders which have all your project files for Android and iOS. So since this is NSMeetup, let's go look into the iOS one. Okay, so I'm just gonna pick a simulator and run the thing. So if you notice, when I hit the run button, this thing popped up. What this thing is doing is React Native is starting a tiny Node.js server to package all the JavaScript files into a bundle and give it to the native app to execute. So this is going to keep running in the background, but we don't have to worry about it. Sometimes it crashes, but it has evolved since the start, since when I started using React Native. So it wouldn't crash in this one. Okay, so there you go. We have our app, the boilerplate. All it does is work with React. When you make changes in your JavaScript code, you don't have to recompile the app. All you have to do is hit Command R on your simulator, and it will reload. It will fetch more new JavaScript and reload it. If you're running it on your device, you shake it, and then in the menu you will hit reload, and it'll reload it. Okay, so let's go through the project files. If you look at the app delegate.m, that's where your app would start. You will see that there is this line where that thing is declaring a variable called JS code location with a URL. This URL is pointing to my own machine. Then that's where it's getting the JavaScript file from. If you were in production, you would bundle it up into a file, add it to your assets, and then you would use this line instead, which is commented right now. Or you could use macros or whatever iOS magic that you would want to use for this. So this JS code location is given to React root view, and in this project, there's one root view that it initializes with. If you go and look at the libraries, you will see that React is a dependency, and all these other things, React action sheet, geolocation, image, linking, blah, 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 all of those things are the React native modules that come with it. What this basically is you take native Objective-C code, you write some kind of wrapper, which is JavaScript, and you will be able to use the JavaScript in your JavaScript land. All these libraries are added as static dependencies to this project. Okay, so now let's take a look at all the JavaScript code. If you open your folder, you'll see node modules, which are all your JS dependencies, and index.ios.js. That's your entry point to your app. Now what I'm going to do is replace this whole file with some other code. Okay, cool. How many of you have done any React development before? Okay, so there are a few. So in React, everything you see, every view you see is a component. And what you see on the screen is kind of defined by the render method. So the render method there returns other components, and those components get rendered on the screen. So in this one, it's returning a navigator, and navigator, it just says, okay, this is the background color, this is the tint color, And this is the initial route for the navigator. And the initial route is the main file. So that's where what the app is going to do is show all the pictures, and that's the main thing. And then when you tap on a picture, you show the detail of the picture. And that's all. That's what this is going to do, right? So that's the initial route, the main component. Of course, we're going to have to write main.js for that. So let's go and create a new file and write .js. So that's me importing React Native, React.create class, and this exports this main component. So the first file that we just saw, index.js, could use it. Render method decides what this component is going to show. So to start with, I'm just going to start with a plain view text and hello. That's all we're going to do. And of course, we need to import text and view to tell what it's going to be. So now if you see, there is this hello there, the top left, because there's no style, there's no, we didn't tell where to render it, we didn't tell anything, we just said, oh, yeah, render hello. And that's what it did, starting from the top left corner. Now, let's add a navigation bar to it. The interesting thing about React is in your render methods, you can have variables or you can call other functions that are returning more components. So in this case, this function is returning a navigation bar. And voila, you should see a navigation bar. We refresh. There you go. Pretty fast, isn't it? Now, okay, so let's add some more stuff. Let's add the login button that we want to log into Instagram. So what this login button is going to do is when you tap on it, it takes you to Safari to log in. Then Safari opens your app with the URL, the redirect URL that you give it, and then you get the access token to fetch your pictures. Okay, so in this code, right, you know what a view is. I've added some styles. Flex one means flex the whole view to whatever space you get. Align everything in the center and justify all the contents in the center. If you have done any web development, this would you will feel at home. But if you have not done any web development like I was a few months ago, you'll be like, what the hell is this? But give it a few days and you'll be fine. Now, one thing to notice here is that touchable opacity. What that thing is doing is, so if you're adding a button on iOS, you have a component that says a button, so you tap it. When you tap the button, it becomes a little opaque. But React Native does not have a button. So what they did was created a component that makes anything inside it opaque. So that text is going to become opaque when you touch it. And that's what that touchable opacity does. And of course, it has an onPress method that does something when you press it. Okay, so I'm going to remove that hello and add this view here. And of course, I'm going to have to import touchable opacity. So I'm doing that. And I'm going to have to write the login method. Don't worry about the method that's there. It's a third-party library I'm using for the OAuth thing with Instagram API. We don't have to look into what that is doing. It's just getting me the token. Okay, but I still need to import it. Cool, so this should work, right? Oops. Okay, so what happened here? We went to Safari, because I already had put in my username and password at some point. It gave the token. It's trying to use the URL to call back the app, but we don't have the URL schemes defined. iOS developers, you would know that, and it's a very easy fix. Just go to your app, plist file, and add your URL scheme, and but this is not it, because this URL needs to be transferred from Objective C to JavaScript. Is it too small? Yeah. Okay. So because this URL needs to be transferred from Objective C to JavaScript, you need to add a method that does that. So this React linking manager is what we're calling, and that's gonna transfer all the whole URL to JavaScript. Okay, and since we are changing code in Objective-C, now we have to rebuild the app and rerun it on the simulator. Okay, let's see. Cool. Oops. So we came back to our app, but we got a red screen of death. And what it says is some method, fetch data, is undefined. Cool. Why red screen? I don't know, because blue screens are too mainstream. Okay, so coming back to our JavaScript code, let's define this fetch data. Let's write this method. Cool. So once we get the access token, we are fetching some content from Instagram. And once we get the response, we're setting the response data into this thing, set state. Now, let me stop at this point and talk about states in React components. You know what render does? It renders all the things onto the screen. But state is actually the whole state of the component. Every time you change the state, it will re-render everything based on the state. So every component has its own state. Now I'm setting the state, and I'm adding like 2 variables to the state data, and loaded is true. But since I'm doing that right now, I still have to write some more code to set the state when the component was like instantiated for the first time. So the way to do that is like get initial state. Again, a simple function that returns a JavaScript object with 2 values. Data is null, and loaded is false. So when it loads, the state of the value of that thing changes, and the render method is called again, and it will re-render. But at this point, it's going to render the same thing because we're not changing what it renders based on the state. So let's change that code and add something there. Okay, so let's change this view and change it to this. What this is doing is based on the value of loaded. If it is loaded, it renders a scroll view with all the subviews. If it's not loaded, it shows me a login button. Okay. What I still need to do is define this get subviews method. Okay, I'm going to do that. What this method does is it iterates over all the data, and for each item, it puts down an image with the URI of the item. Okay, so that does it. But if you look at the touchable opacity, you will see that onPress calls another method that we need to define. So this method is what's going to push a new view on the navigation stack. And that is the detailed view that we should be writing soon. Okay. So let's write detail.js. And there is nothing that this view does except there is no detail. All it does is prints out the same URL that the image was loaded from. So all this is going to do is show the URL. Okay, so that's our app, and that's my cat. That's it. And that was pretty easy. Just for fun, I'm going to add a text input there. Uh, right now, there's no need to do it, but I'm going to, at some point later in the presentation, I'm going to use that. So I'll just add it right now. If you notice, in that text input, the styles are defined differently from how they're defined in the view up there. So that's another way of styling your components. You can also style separately. It could even be in a different file. And you could swap out the style file and swap in a different style file, and your whole app could look different, just like JavaScript, HTML, CSS stuff. Okay, so we have a text box, and we can type. Good, that's perfect. And this is where I'm going to stop with this demo app. So, and go back to the presentation. How hard was that? Not really, right? It was 0 to, okay, working is not really, I should say somewhat working in 15 minutes-ish. But that was not bad. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what I mean by it's really fast to work with React Native. The next upside that I really liked, and this is one of my personal favorites, is code reuse. You will be amazed at how much code we have reused with this. And I'm going to show you a tiny demo for that. Okay, so let's, no, this is not the one. Yes, this is the one. Okay, so this was our entry file index.js. I'm going to do some moving around. I'm going to take this file and take all the content from this and create another file called nav.js. And then I'm going to call that file from iOS and Android both. Okay, so I'm creating nav.js. I'm copying everything from index.js. This looks exactly the same. Now I'm changing index.js to call to include the nav component instead of what it was doing earlier. And I'm I should be going back to nav.js to change. Yeah, so this, because now main is in the same folder as nav, we need to change the path. The iOS app looks exactly the same. There's no difference. Because we didn't really change anything, we just added one level of indirection of how things are being rendered here. But in the meanwhile, I also have this Android emulator running, which has the boilerplate app. Now I'm going to go into index.android.js and change that code. Okay, so that was the boilerplate code. I'm going to copy everything from iOS, put it in Android. And I'll go back to the emulator and refresh. Okay, oops, red screen again. What happened this time? Uh, if you see, it says null is not an object while evaluating status bar iOS.setStyle. Of course, I mean, that's easy. I'm giving Android something that iOS should have. Like there's no status bar iOS on Android. So it would be really nice if I had this component. Uh, so it would be really nice if I had this nav component. Where is the nav component? Yes, it would be really nice if I had this component render iOS things, iOS stuff, and Android stuff in the same file, right? Because I could have much more other logic in this component, and I could share that. So to be able to do that, we're gonna create a util file, and let's call it react.ios.js. Okay, And what I'm writing in this file is this. Okay, so this is a little advanced for people who have not written JavaScript. Uh, I'm, I'm requiring React. Now I'm taking React and I'm assigning the create class method. I'm basically redefining the class to add its original render method to do render iOS first, look for render iOS. If it's there, execute that. If it's not there, execute render mobile. If it's not there, execute render. If that's not there, throw this exception. Okay, so, and I'm gonna do the same for Android, except I'm gonna change this to render Android. So now I created two files, react.android.js and react.ios.js. And when I import those files into my other components, uh, the way I create React components is going to change. And it will start looking for render Android, render mobile, and render for Android apps. It'll start looking for render iOS, mobile, and render for iOS apps in that order. Okay, so let's go back to the nav.js. And now, since I changed React from what it was, instead of requiring React Native, I'm going to have to require my own version of React now. I'm going to change that into util slash React. So notice that it auto-completed to .ios, but I deleted that. It's because React Native knows when it's on iOS, it will always look for .ios.js files, unless you tell it specifically. It's when it's on Android, it will look for .android.js files, unless you tell specifically. Okay, so now that is done. Let's change this render method into render iOS, because this is what we want on iOS. And copy this into render Android. And let's not have a navigator because that crashed, right? So I'm just gonna add a view, and let's bring the hello back. There we go. And of course, I'm gonna have to import the view and text because they're not imported in this file. There you go. So on Android, we have hello. With the same component renders two different things on Android and iOS. Imagine if you had something, let's say if you were actually rendering all the Instagram pictures and you wanted those pictures to be rendered with a different background on Android, different layout on iOS, or you could basically reuse this whole component. And this is what I really love about React. And what we have done at AeroFS is we have a third method that says render web. And now we are using the same component on web, Android, and iOS. So if I had to guess, we have at least 60% code reuse from web into mobile. And we have about 80% code reuse from iOS and Android. And it's not hampering performance for us. It does not. It looks like a native app. There's no difference between you won't be able to tell if it's a native app or not. That's because everything that's rendered on the screen is native. Okay, so the third upside that I also like is dynamic updates. How many of us hate the App Store review process? Everybody, like we all do. It takes a week. Why does it take a week for them to review an app? Like I just changed like a few words or just changed the color, and it still takes a week. We don't have to do that anymore. Because it's just JS code, you can host your JS code somewhere on the internet, download it, and give the new JS bundle to your React root view, and it will render that. And this is amazing. At our hackathon last, during, when was it? Thanksgiving, yeah, Thanksgiving hackathon. So I wrote that, and and then later found out that Microsoft had written this about a week before I wrote that. So the difference between code push and React Native Updater is that code push needs its own server, so you use their server and then you push your JavaScript code, and then your app will pull it from there. With this, it's very configurable. Uh, you can basically put it on Dropbox, set it as public, and you can download your new code, and your app is updated. The downside with this is I didn't get time to do that. Is that it does not update your images, only the code. This does. So anyway, so this is what I really like about React Native. So you must be wondering, yeah, there must be some things that you don't like, right? Because the title was ups and downs. Yes, there's a downside number one. When you have a lot of JavaScript code, you will see a lag, and I will demonstrate. Okay, so this. Okay. Okay, so in this thing, I'm going to do something that none of us will ever do in real life. Check this out. Every 1.5 seconds, I'm sleeping for a second. And JavaScript is going to be busy doing that. JavaScript is going to be sleeping for a second every 1.5 seconds. So how does that affect your app? You will see. Okay. It's scrolling fine, no issues there. But I tap, and look at that. That was bad. That was really bad. Oh. That first tap I did was not even recognized. Now I'm typing, and what's that? Whoa, some kind of warning. Okay. Let's take a look at that. Is 16 events ahead of JavaScript? Try to make your JavaScript faster. Yeah, I know my JavaScript is wasting time there, yeah. And that's how it makes you feel, right? Ouch. Okay, let's go back. Now, why did that happen? Why did you see this? It's because the way React Native is architected. Your app starts with a main thread, and React starts two more threads with it. One that executes JavaScript code, and one that's a shadow thread. That thing does all the, like, executes all the JS and gives it to this to do all the math to where to lay out the components. And then this thing gives it back to the main thread to actually lay it out. All these things over here are the native modules that I talked about earlier, like the action sheet, linking, all those libraries that we saw when we created the project. So the reason this thing is slow is because your JS is so busy wasting time that it does not get the events coming from your native modules. So they are queued up in the message queue, and your JS is busy doing something else, and that's why that happens. Now you're going to be like, come on, I mean, who's going to do that? Give me a real life example. Like, when does this happen, right? Yes, it has happened with me. File handling. When you're handling huge files, basically when you're getting files from the Objective-C to JS, that communication on that message queue, when you're, let's say, transferring 10 megabytes of files, it's going to be slow. Lots of inefficient JavaScript code, just like what we wrote. Don't do that. To avoid some of inefficiency, React provides this method called should component update. What this method does is you return a true or false. React calls this method on each component every time it needs to render it. You change the state, it renders the component. Before rendering, it calls this. And you tell React if this component should be updated or not. If you return false, it will not be updated. So you, based on your current state and your previous state, you do the math and tell it whether it should update it or not. And if it does not update, there's a lot of rendering, the math that goes after rendering, that all that thing is avoided. And you get a lot of efficiency in your code. And this is what we fixed in most of our code when we saw those things. One thing that I would like to add to that is to fix this, you should offload some of your code to native. So I said that if there's a lot of JavaScript code, it's going to be slow. So instead of writing code in JavaScript, maybe take some of that code, write a native module, and then call it from JavaScript. I mean, that'll be counterproductive for your code reuse, but at least your app will be not laggy. Okay, so I talked about this. This is a comment I was when I was browsing through their GitHub issues. I saw transferring data back and forth between JS and Objective-C is slow, and that's why you would want to keep all the data in Objective-C. It's just because that you want to keep that message queue clear for the events that are more important than transferring this data. So imagine if you're getting a file, chunking it up, and then uploading it. All these arrows that are in red, those are going to be slow. Versus if you're just getting a URL and then processing it, and then sending it back to native, and then native does all the chunking and uploading, that's going to be faster. Okay, number 3. I would rate it number 3 actually. People say that any abstraction that is like non-trivial, somewhere they leak somewhere or the other. By leak, it doesn't necessarily mean it's memory leak. It could be bugs in React Native that take your time. That's a time leak, right? Something that you wrote doesn't work because there's a bug in React Native. You can't really do anything to your code to fix that. You'll have to dig deep and fix that there. You'll waste some time there. Lack of understanding. Yes, this happens because React is big. Everything they do, there's not a lot of documentation and help. I mean, if I had some money for every time I had to go to the documentation go to the code to see what it does instead of reading the documentation, I would be a little richer than what I am right now. But you know what? React Native is new and it's growing really fast, so it's worth a shot. My final take is that it is pretty awesome. The job that people at Facebook have done, they've done a really good job. And it's also revolving really fast. Every 2 weeks, there's a new version, and they fix something or the other, which is really good. But as I said, like you need to have a balance because like if you try to execute everything in JavaScript, that may not work for your app. You might want to offload something to native. So you might want to write some stuff in native, and you want to write some stuff in JavaScript, and gauge that based on what you want to reuse in your other apps that you like, maybe your web app or maybe your Android app. Like gauge that based on what you want to reuse. So the next question is, people would ask me, like, in what scenarios would I use React Native for? So this is only my opinion. I think if I were to write, let's say, a chess game, I would write in React Native. If I were to write, let's say, a product catalog, I would write in React Native. But if I was writing Angry Birds or Dropbox, probably not, because those things are pretty much not really supported there. If I was writing Slack or WhatsApp, of course, these will be knockoffs of those products. I'm not, well, I can't do it single-handedly. But if I was writing those, probably would be proceeding with a lot of caution because there's a lot of moving parts in there. So some things would be written in native and some things would be written in JavaScript. Any questions? Yes.
About how big is your code base at AeroFS? Can you read, like, how much code have you written across those three platforms?
Number of lines.
Or any metric? I don't know.
We have about, I don't, okay, if I had to guess, we have about 300 components. What do you say, Matt?
Maybe it'd be helpful to frame it in terms of developer time. We've had 4 developers on this for 6 months.
Okay, so we have, yes, we have about 3.5. The other half was half because he left for a paternity leave. So 3.5 developers on it for 6 months.
I
And
don't know exactly how many lines, but it should give you a ballpark.
and we are very close to releasing it. Watch out for our new product. Yes, anyone?
I was wondering, you mentioned you put Dropbox on the like, don't do this React Native at AeroFS. It's in many ways similar.
Okay, so yes, good question. You got me there. Okay, so yes, that has been my. I have been telling product, so we should move away soon. We are at the point where we can't go, we can't squeeze it anymore. Uh, but yes, we are. We will do that move at some point. For now, the product that we're building does not necessarily depend wholly on files. So we are fine to a certain extent. Yes.
You showed some use of style sheets and how that applies to Android and iOS. Is there any specifics about your approach to style sheets when you're introducing HTML or web into the mix? And maybe
So yes. So the question is, these style sheets for Android and iOS. Can you introduce the web style sheets into the into this to make it work? After 6 months of doing this, I still haven't written one line of HTML. So and no CSS at all. Uh, but I will try to answer that question. We still do the same way. We still do web style sheets the same way that you would do on web. And those are included separately. And all our styles for web, iOS, and Android, we have 3 folders. We also, so the way we have written that utility file for rendering those render methods, we also have those written for style sheets. And what that does is first checks if there is a mobile style sheet, then checks if there is a iOS style sheet, and then combines it. The more specific always overrides the more generic. Web style sheets are completely different. Yes.
So you talk about code sharing between web, iOS, and Android.
Mm-hmm.
Are all of your code for those 3 platforms in one Git repo?
Yes, it's in one Git repo. In fact, everything is one repo at our company. We call it the mono repo. So,
And are you using Git?
yes. Yes.
I have a mostly native app, or let's say it's completely native, but I want to try React Native in there. Let's say I want to only have a few bits of my app be React Native, like my onboarding. Like, is that easy to do?
Oh, yes, that's an amazing question. That's a good question, and it is easy to do. What you need to do is, remember I showed that React root view. You create an instance of that, you put it anywhere in your app, and that will load the JavaScript you ask it to load. You're done. Yes.
2 questions. The first question is, have you heard of or seen yourself in instances where Apple is reticent to approve these apps because of the ability for it to completely change how they've approved it?
No, so a good question. I read Apple's documentation on that. It says that they will approve it as long as it does not change the basic functionality of the app. So don't do like first version is Dropbox and second version is WhatsApp. They won't approve that.
And then the second question is, so you have to deploy a binary at some point to Apple, which has React
Yes.
native libraries on it. Talking about it's being iterated on, bug fixed or whatever. Um, if you're pulling code from like a web server to be rendered, you find that there's versioning problems with like support between what you had in the shell of your app to the App Store versus what you have on the server and how you work with those version issues between them for someone that hasn't updated. What does that look like?
Yes, so the question is about versioning, React version changes. The app that a user has a different version of React, an app that some other user has a different version of React, and how do they download the JavaScript file and execute it smoothly? I don't know. We haven't automated that yet. Uh, I would like to do some work on uh, having a minimum common version and like attack that. Uh,
I mean, one short solution is just like put up a wall in your app that says go update to the store. They go
Yeah, you could do that. So yeah, you could. So I think I don't remember it. I have not touched React Native Auto Updater since I wrote it. But I think so that thing when it's downloading the JS file, it checks what the minimum required app version is. And if it's not, it doesn't match, it doesn't download the JS file. Because if it downloads it and there's a mismatch, it's going to crash. Yes.
You said you have about 60% use for the web store.
Mhm.
What kind of code you find yourself using web or what kind of code you find rewriting for different platforms?
Okay, so let me think. So the question was, I said that there was about 60% code reuse from web. What kind of questions, what kind of code, a few examples maybe, is that something you reuse? And I'm trying to think of something without exposing the new product, and it's really hard. Uh,
Are they mostly like UI components, or is it business logic, or like what is it?
Okay, so it's yes. Thank you for that. Okay, so the code that talks to the web server, uh, talks to server, does REST calls, gets all the data, processes the data, and then code that uploads stuff, not files, uploads stuff to the server. So all that code is shared. The reason you can share all that code is because web uses XHR, and React Native has built their own versions of XHR, which is similar to web, which uses the underlying native code. Yes.
So this is not what you said, but it sounded like you were saying, use React for the views and put your, let's say, controller and business logic in. That's one way you can do it. But you didn't mention Flux or any of the other components, frameworks that you use to implement the rest of your app in the React way. I
Yes.
just wonder what because you've got all these other frameworks that you'll either have to wrap or bridge or just access through native. So I just wonder kind of where you landed in that space.
Yes. Okay. So right now, the current version that we are working on, uh, we are using Flux. We are using React stores. We have all the actions and stores and everything that you would see on React Web. Right? The only things that we're doing with native modules is something that we cannot do with uh, React. Or like maybe XHR does not support some things. File upload from JavaScript is expensive. So only those things are some things that we are writing native modules. But otherwise, we have everything that you mentioned. And that is all the code reuse that we're doing. Yes.
Question is a lot of scope, but so you mentioned that you're downloading JavaScript code and rendering it and keep doing that. That allows you to hot push your code. But is there anything kind of structurally that's limiting that with JavaScript? Why can't somebody just create something that would do the same thing with Swift or Objective C code that you know?
It needs to be compiled for your, like, you can't just send Swift or Objective-C, as far as I know. Do you know if you can?
So the guide, Apple's documentation says
Okay, there you go.
All of their interpreted code has to be bundled with the application in the App Store review.
Okay, so we'll have to wait for that to change. Yes.
So I assume that you guys are working on the Android part as well as the iOS. So
Yes, we
you
are.
talked about all these things you have to do natively. How's your Android skills stack?
Oh, okay. So before I joined, I was primarily iOS developer, and I have done Android, Ruby on Rails, and a little bit of Angular and Backbone. So my Android skills have become better than what they were, but I'm still not an I'm still not an expert in this or iOS
So
either.
you have to do things like adding Android theme, related things in there, like you can do for us.
Yeah, you have to do a little bit of Android. So that's why I said if you're building something easy, you don't need any of that, right? But if you're building as you go down in this thing, here you should probably not do it. But over here, you will need some native skills. Yes.
Okay, what about the instrumentation for like apps? You have, memory application, that sort of stuff,
Uh,
and also like automation testing.
really good question. I have seen crashes and I have no idea what's happening because the whole stack trace is React's code, and that's the, I guess, leaky thing that I was talking about.
So I guess how much, well, it sounds like you're not huge in both mobile platforms or whatever, but like how much are you time, do you at least attempt to like I'm going to build a new component. So you try, I would assume you try and build it in a shared place, and then you would look at it in both platforms, like an Android and iPhone, and then see like, oh, like Android like doesn't quite look right. Like how quickly do you, how much time, how often does that happen? Like where you might have to like fork a component, or like how much time do you attempt to spend trying to make it the same or shared, or do you not do like, I don't know.
So when I'm writing custom components or custom native modules, I start with iOS, and then once that's working, that's for me that's like a proof of concept. Once that's working, then I'm like, okay, if it works on this, it should work on Android because iOS by nature is more restrictive than Android. Uh,
Do you find anything like, I mean, some views must just behave differently. I just wonder.
yes, they do. They do behave differently, and sorry, I don't really understand what the question was after that. I mean, they do behave differently, but then that's it. Like you can't really do much. Yeah. Yes.
How native does it actually feel? And just pointing out, like when I saw the navigation controller, like the push and the pop, like the navigation controller had it said back, it didn't say the title. Or, it didn't have a little arrow thing.
Yes. That's because
Is it actually
yes,
the real?
that's because the navigation bar is also a UI view. It's not actually navigation. So imagine you starting with a clean slate and writing your own.
So then,
Uh,
is there a way to say put a navigation controller in this JavaScript?
so when React Native started, they started with something called Navigator iOS, but for some reason they wanted something that could work on both platforms, and they stopped working on that, and then they started working on Navigator, which is their own implementation of Navigator. So the reason you saw that lag was because uh, the whole rendering is happening in JavaScript. So each uh, when the view moves each pixel, the JavaScript tells, like the whole calculation happens and then it tells the native thing to re-render again. But instead, if it was offloading the whole animation to native, then this would not happen. And they are working on it right now, and there's an open issue on GitHub. Yes.
What's the process to determine what code can be reused?
I don't know how I can answer that question because I have not like established a process per se. It's
Is it
just
trial and error, or is it documented?
it's just looking and trying to head in that direction. I think like if I'm, but if I sit down for an hour and like think of my process and write it down, I could probably come up with a process, but I don't know. Yes.
Do you more commonly end up forking Android versus iOS methods, or do you also do this with inline code?
There's no inline code. We don't do if platform equals iOS, platform equals Android. Maybe in all our code base, maybe twice, but generally it's just methods. Yes.
Have you ever ran into a problem where you had to dig deep into React Native and maybe you had to make changes to React Native itself and fork the repo?
Yes, I have ran into those problems. I have forked the repo, made changes to React Native, but most of the times you end up building a custom node native module, and that works. But yes, I have had like there have been times where I had to dig deep into React Native. Yes.
Similar to my previous question, I mean, is it easy to just embed a React view in your UI instead of just taking over your whole screen?
Yes, you can. So when you add your view, you set what dimensions you want.
So it's like a native like React view or UI subclass.
Yeah. RCT root view is a subclass of UI view. You can put it wherever you want, and that will render your JavaScript. Yes.
So you don't get a navigation controller. Who do you get? Do you get a table view? You know, which are the basic?
Okay, so instead of a table view, they have. So he's trying to. I did that too. He's trying to. He's trying to create like an analogy graph from stuff you get with iOS and stuff you get with React. You don't get the same navigation controller, but they have a navigator which is a simulated one. You don't get a table view. They have a list view, which is simulated table view. It does not reuse your cells the way iOS does, but it uses them in a way that the ones that go off the screen are garbage collected, as far as I understand. Other than
Separate components. They're not. I was a little confused because you said it. You couldn't tell, like a user can't tell because it just looks like an app. But they're not. They're not like you're in Android. It's not an Android button. It's a React button, right? Like React button and view and all these things.
yes, but if you look at it, everything underneath is a UI view, right? On iOS also.
Yeah, but it's like a custom list view that mimics the behavior of the table.
Yes. So you could
So like,
you.
make the only widget in Android. You can't just drop that inside of React Native, right? It's like a completely separate world, kind of. That has a lot of parallels, but it's separate, right?
Kind of. It has forked at some point, but it's not completely parallel.
Right there for JavaScript.
Yes.
There is like a whole document there about writing.
So this actually has a list of those things.
In mapping, is that the, you use a mapping via React?
Yes, you could use anything via React. If it's not there, you write your own bridge. Yes.
Not totally iOS, but on the website, are you doing server-side rendering as well?
Sorry, on the website server side.
So for the web components, are you just doing client-side React.js or also server-side React.js?
Is there a server side? I did not know that.
There is, but it's often done for like SEO.
Okay. So the question was if we are doing server side React.js. I did not know that it existed. So we're not. Thank you.